Welcome to Critical Weight Theory. Seattle in the 1980s was about to explode. Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, the world would soon know the word grunge. But not every band from that rainy city fit that label. Some were carving a different path that was literary, cinematic, and atmospheric. And today we're talking about one of those types of bands. We're talking about the Walkabouts, a band that lived in the same scene as the grunge giants, but created something entirely their own, and were in some ways, unfortunately, overshadowed quite a bit by grunge. And that's why they are not as widely remembered as those other bands. So the Walkabouts formed in 1984, led by Chris Ekman and Carla Torgerson. Both sang, both played guitar, and together they built a sound steeped in Americana, folk, and European influences. This wasn't garage rock, and it wasn't stadium ready anthems. Think moody ballads, lush instrumentation, and storytelling lyrics that carried a weight similar to the greatness of Leonard Cohen, Neil Young, or Nick Cave, with Michael Wells on bass, Terry Moeller on drums, and Glenn Slater on keyboards. The Walkabouts quickly established themselves as Seattle outsiders, not grunge, not mainstream, but something in between. And the sound is actually pretty memorable, which is partly why it's a mystery why they didn't become at least a little bit bigger. Songs like The Light Will Stay On and Slow Red Dawn show what they were about: dark, cinematic, but deeply human. They weren't afraid to embrace quiet moments or let songs sprawl and breathe. That's one of the things that sets this band apart from some others, is that their songs have that sort of natural feel to it, like they're not trying to play by genre rules or but playing gimmicks. It just seems like they were trying to be themselves, which is quite often a respectable trait. But a lot of bands that are like that just are not as successful as they could be. And critics called them a musician's band, never formulaic, never bland, a group that made music for people who wanted depth and not just hooks. And their early records, See Beautiful Rattlesnake Gardens in 1988 and Cataract in 1989, laid the foundation for their career path. Then came a move to Sub Pop with Scavenger in 1991, which gave them wider exposure. Actually, I might have to correct that. They might have been with Sub Pop before then. But oddly enough, they actually had more success in Europe than in Seattle itself, at least from what I understand. You can correct me on that point if I'm just not right about that, but that's what I've gathered. They took off in Europe more than in the United States, apparently. The German label Glitterhouse Records had signed them, and suddenly the Walkabouts were big across Germany and beyond. While technically Glitterhouse Records was like the European arm of Sub Pop Records. And of course, Sub Pop actually invented, in a significant way, the very term of grunge. They marketed that music under the word grunge, and it caught on, and that's why we know it as grunge music today. It wasn't so much the artists themselves who were happy to call themselves that. It was a sort of marketing strategy, largely to do with Sub Pop Records. So you might kind of roll your eyes at that fact, and because it just sort of highlights how powerful marketing can be. But you almost have to respect it at the same time, because Sub Pop was a huge part of music history in the 1990s for creating that label and for, helping to give us those big grunge bands. But anyway, this isn't so much about grunge. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here, perhaps. So by the mid 1990s, they were, the band was recording ambitious albums like Devil's Road with the Warsaw Philharmonic. So if you haven't listened to that album, you can still kind of imagine it, a Seattle alt country rock band backed by a full orchestra making one of the most striking records of their career. It's probably something you want to check out if you're at all into this sort of music. Meanwhile, albums like New West Motel and Setting the Woods on Fire, they established their reputation for blending country noir with rock grit, and it's just a good band. I mean, what more can I say? The Walkabouts weren't just about the group. Chris Ekman collaborated with artists like Willard Grant, Conspiracy, and Hugo Race. Carla Torgerson released solo work and spent a lot of time with European musicians. Even with these side projects, the band kept going. Into the 2000s, they continued releasing thoughtful, layered albums, even as the mainstream passed them by. Their final studio record, Travels in the Dustland, arrived in 2011. 4 years later, in 2015, the Walkabouts quietly announced that they were calling it quits after 3 decades. So you can't say the band didn't stick around for a long time. 30 years, that's a pretty successful run for any band, even if they didn't, sell that many records. They weren't, kings of the album charts or anything. But nevertheless, they lasted for 30 years, and some people out there, they have heard of the Walkabouts. I kind of randomly stumbled upon them as they played on, I don't know if it was Amazon Music or Pandora, but, I was interested in them, so I'm covering them here today. And, I really like the reflective music that they put out. And I'm sure that at some point I will listen to and review one of their albums for this podcast. Well, I mean, assuming I'm not like, struck by meteor or something like that, hit by a semi truck randomly. I think I'll eventually try to get around to reviewing at least one of their albums for this podcast. But the Walkabouts were never the face of on the magazine cover. They never sold out arenas, and they still built something lasting, which is cool. They have a loyal fan base, especially in Europe, a discography full of haunting, literate, deeply felt songs, and a legacy that proves Seattle music wasn't just grunge. And I think sometimes people forget that. Even back in the 1990s and the 1980s, there were bands who were at least a little bit outside of the grunge label. And I mean, what's funny about that is you could probably listen to their songs and find at least one song in the mix that's a little bit more on the grungy side. It's like it's like these people who will debate what band is and what isn't grunge. It's kind of funny because you can find at least some grunge elements in a lot of different forms of music. You know, it's a people forget that genres are actually more flexible than they're sometimes given credit for. So that's why sometimes people forget that, like Johnny Cash in the early days when he started out, he was playing rockabilly music. So he was actually kind of a rock star instead of just being a country musician back when he started. And, this band, they were storytellers, explorers, and unforgettable for those who heard about them. And that's about it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard here, feel free to subscribe, hit the like button, leave a review, and maybe queue up Devil's Road or New West Motel, or that one album with the cool name, Travels in the Dustland. I kind of like that title. And I think the coolest one of all, though, is Sea Beautiful Rattlesnake Gardens. It's an interesting album title, and they're an interesting band. Go ahead and check them out. And thanks for listening.